Washington, D.C., the capital city of the richest and most powerful nation on earth. In Washington, there are three centers of power. The White House, where the president lives and works. Capitol Hill, where the legislative business of government is done by the House of Representatives and the Senate. The Supreme Court, where the nation's laws are interpreted. You're probably thinking, we know all that. That's who runs the country. That's what I was taught when I became a citizen. But I've begun to think there may be more to it than that. Now, I'm not a political journalist or any other kind of Washington insider. And I think that's an advantage when it comes to looking at what goes on here. Insiders tend to shrug and accept things the way they are. I don't. And that's why I wanted to ask the question, does the government really run the country? And that brought me to K Street. It doesn't look very special or imposing, but some people say that this is where the real power in the United States resides, where you can find a powerful group which is little known by the public, because this is where many Washington lobbyists are based. Lobbyists far outnumber anybody in the government that we can vote for. There are 435 members of the House of Representatives and 100 senators. But Washington is crawling with lobbyists. 14,000 are officially registered. For each member of Congress, that's 26 lobbyists. They wield immense power in a situation without parallel in any other Western democracy. In 2008 and 9, they spent a staggering amount of money, $6.7 billion. Could it possibly be that the special interests they work for don't expect to get some return on that money?
One lobbyist did a calculation for his company and found that for every $1 his clients spent on lobbying services, they received $100 in benefits. That's either pain avoided or actual benefits received. And that kind of return you can't find anywhere else.
You saw recently a $700 billion bailout of the financial system. Now, the banks and securities firms and other firms in the financial industry, they are the top industry donating to members of Congress and the president over the last 10 years with $2 billion. Now, what a return on investment. $2 billion put in and $700 billion bailout.
In one of the 2007 Democratic presidential candidates' debates, there was at least one heated exchange about lobbying.
I disagree with the notion that lobbyists don't have disproportionate influence. Look, the insurance and the drug companies spent $1 billion in lobbying over the last 10 years.
Senator Edwards has really a very straightforward question here, which is, will you continue to take money from lobbyists?
Yes, I will.
This position?
I will, because
you.
You know, a lot of those lobbyists, whether you like it or not, represent real Americans. They actually do. They represent nurses. They represent, social workers. They represent corporations that employ a lot of people. So, the idea that somehow a contribution is going to influence you, I just ask you to look at my record. I have been fighting for the same things. My core principles have not changed.
Senator Edwards,
if you have any question about whether Washington lobbyists have disproportionate influence, too much influence, how many people in this room have a Washington lobbyist working for you? I see 2, 3. How many people are in the room? 1,500, 2,000? You are not represented by Washington lobbyists. You need to cut these people off.
This was John Edwards' signature issue. He pounded on it again and again, but it never caught the public imagination. So why should any of us care about what Washington lobbyists do?
Lobbying could not be more relevant to people on the street, to people like you and me. We don't have lobbyists. The companies whose activities affect our lives can hire dozens of people both to get legislation passed that they want and to stop legislation that they don't want.
A very simple example of the way that lobbying can affect all our daily lives is in the issue of food labeling. Remember the salmonella scare of 2008, which made 1,500 people seriously ill? There was no way consumers could avoid the contaminated food because it wasn't labeled with its country of origin. Presumably, you'd like to know which country the food you eat comes from. After all, Congress passed a law in 2002 mandating that you must have that information on a label. But lobbyists for the food industry, which didn't like that law, prevented it from being enforced for 6 years. We wanted to know where our meat and vegetables came from. The food industry didn't want to tell us, and we weren't told.
What really is at stake here, and what I continue to find is fascinating for many years, is it's about power. And whenever power is wielded and it's fought over, you're going to have a very interesting mix and a very important mix. This is the ability, for example, to determine whether or not your son goes off to war. This is going to determine whether or not your parents have health care, what kind of health care. This is going to determine whether your child can go to college.
It really goes right to the heart of how much you're going to pay, how much you're going to get, how much you're going to be able to save, what your standard is going to be of living is going to be in retirement.
People that ignore the power that's being wielded every day, ignore at their peril.
Over the years, the number of lobbyists has grown, but recently their numbers and the money they have to spend has exploded. Googling this topic would produce a seemingly endless list of corporations and large sums of money.
Traditionally, Democrats, when they were out of power, stayed in Washington. There was a reason for that, because they were in control for 40-some years. Republicans went back home to Moline or wherever it was. So you had a town that was totally controlled by Democrats, and there was no incentive for Republicans to stay. Now, over the years, Republicans all stay also. So there are thousands more lobbyists. The competition for client base is ferocious. And think of a client as being a piece of raw meat on the table. You reach out for it, 8 knives go through your hands. There has been a real arms race in money when it comes to lobbying and campaign contributions.
It comes from the complexity of our society, the competition between those on either side of an issue, like clean air or clean water or immigration or health care or Social Security or health insurance system. Those things create big groups that spend a lot of money.
You have to buy advertising time on television. You have to have a very sophisticated computer-based system for identifying potential voters and getting them out to the polls. You have to pay for a large staff of people who are going to be working full-time on this, and all of that costs big bucks.
Every year, the amount of money spent on lobbying increases, a progression with no apparent end in sight. One of the strange things about Washington lobbyists is that nobody knows how many exactly they are. The lines of what is a lobbyist and what isn't are very blurred. All we know for sure is there are many more than the official figures.
I feel that if someone is hired to influence public policy, it's lobbying. And if someone's hired to market the Defense Department to buy a Boeing aircraft, that's lobbying. But those people don't have to register.
The town is filled with former officials, members of Congress, senators, ambassadors, who are all plying this trade. Some of them don't say it's lobbying. Some say it's strategic advice. They don't register, which they're required to do, but most of them lobby. Pure and simple.
When you expand the scope of a contract from 1 million to 500 million, which happened with Blackwater, and you don't have to register, something's wrong.
How difficult can it be to clearly identify who is and is not a lobbyist? If that distinction remains blurred, it can only be because it's in someone's or some group's interest for it to be that way. And what about the 14,000 lobbyists we do know about? I had to wonder. How can so many people relate to only 535 members of Congress? What do they do all day?